Hey, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about something that I've loved for the last couple of years and just finally picked up the legitimate US release from Switchblade Entertainment. That is the Japanese exploitation films Corpse Prison 1 and Corpse Prison Part 2. Now, I sometimes have the reputation of only championing intelligent horror or elevated horror, as some people like to say, a phrase I don't actually like because I think that every emotion that horror evokes is legitimate. Some of them are more intellectual and some of them are more guttural or just more visceral of experiences. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other, but I think that how well each is done matters. So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not an intellectual process. It has things to say, and it definitely isn't what I'd call unintelligent, but its main goal was to produce a satisfying visceral experience. So I'm not just going to talk about Hereditary or The Witch or any of those films that people usually say are elevated horror and that makes them immediately superior. I don't feel that way at all. I am a big fan of exploitation cinema from around the world. And Corpse Prison is a great example of this. These are films that were made back to back, extremely cheaply, especially considering the scope. And that's something I want to talk about right off the bat, is that here you have two films ostensibly. Each are about 94 minutes long, so an hour and a half. So the thing is, they're not two separate films. They are really one long 3-hour film that's cut right down the middle. And as anyone knows, I think 3 hours is too long for most horror experiences. What Corpse Prison does very well is sucks you into this bizarre world that they build. And it's such a small world. It's a very confined setting and a very confined scope. But it still manages to feel immense because of the runtime and the darkness of the themes, but the playfulness of much of its manner. It's a very intriguing mixture to me. And its shortcomings are all peggable on the budget, definitely. It's incredibly well shot, but it is shot for a budget, and you can certainly tell. The actors were all really very good. Of course, I'm saying that as an American watching Japanese actors. There's always the chance that I'm misreading some of their performance just because it's exotic. I will say it's all uniformly in tone with the film they've made, and that's usually the hallmark of good acting. So what are these films about? Well, very simply, it's about a group of female college students, their male teacher, and their female teacher's assistant, who go on a research trip to a very remote village that has been pretty much cut off from the rest of Japan. And it's a town with its own customs. They know going in that these people have developed kind of their own insular society, but they don't know much more than that. It turns out that there hasn't been any female babies born in this town for many generations, so the townspeople have been making up the difference through kidnap and rape and torture. So we're automatically in that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Hills Have Eyes, Wrong Turn mode, but from a very specifically Japanese perspective. So there's a couple different things happening here for the US viewer. Already we have just the exotic nature of the Japanese drama, which is different in its presentation and in its internal language. And I don't mean that as the spoken language. I just mean how their drama is developed is just different than it is in America. And that's often very powerful and adds a sense of unease. Ringu would be a perfect example of what I'm talking about there. But there's another level in Corpse Prison, which is that they're inside a society inside Japan that is just as removed as the US customs are from the Japanese customs. So there's two layers of difference, and that's really uncomfortable. Add to that how politically incorrect these movies are, and how blatant they are about the fact that these are exploitation films. Now, it was based on an online manga, and an extremely popular one in Japan. that is kind of an amazing and hopeful thing to me, that something that's so unpalatable to modern American sensibilities as far as the subject matter and even the presentation would become so popular in Japan that a 3-hour film broken into 2 parts would be even something possible. I think the Japanese definitely are a little bit more grounded in their approach to entertainment and how it should fit into their society. There's basically 2 ways people decide to view entertainment. It's either you believe that your entertainment is reflecting the world you live in, which is what I believe, or you believe that your entertainment is leading your culture, and ultimately depraved entertainment is going to cause your society to degrade. I don't believe that at all. I think it's a lame argument. I think there's no proof behind it. Corpse Prison is not degenerate entertainment. That's, I think, what really sets these movies apart. Again, I am not vouching for them as intelligent entertainment or, any kind of an intellectual exercise. These are straight up exploitation films. But inside that framework, these films manage to tell us something about where we are by looking at how another society is making their exploitation horror films. And it shows how much work we have to do. There's some really smart subversions of expectation in these films. The classic slasher visage of the huge man wearing the plain white mask in the woods is presented here, but recontextualized so that he's the moral center of this town. And I mean that. I'm not playing with words here. He is the most moral townsperson. And he still is that slasher archetype of a type, but his moral code is much more in line with what you or I as a viewer would expect from us instead of your Jason or your Leatherface. Whereas the entire town has kind of degraded into cannibalism and rape and incest. There's a mythology here that involves something called the Maggot Woman, which is absolutely horrendous, but has become a centerpiece of their society and their culture and their religion, as it were. It's really interesting that concepts like this can play in Japan, and in America we can't do that. We can't go into these uncomfortable places. We can't talk about how gender inequality can be really, really ugly. Instead, we have to have empowerment films instead of showcasing the horrors themselves. And I think that's a primary difference in approach that is holding us back to a certain degree, because empowerment dramas by their nature are always going to be fantasies, right? They're not going to be what's really going on in the world, and especially once you get outside the United States, which is a pretty comfortable place to live, you get to a lot of nations that are underdeveloped and do not have proper education systems that help temper down the rougher edges of a society. You realize that the horrors out there are really what we should be presenting and railing against. The empowerment dramas, your Captain Marvels, they're just kind of empty exercises to make people feel good rather than talk about what we can never slide back into. And I think that's more important. Now, I did say at the beginning of this, these movies are not themselves making any kind of a statement. They're not. But their existence makes a statement, and it's a powerful one. These little exploitation films that have nothing going for them. They don't have the budget. They don't have the resources. They're shot on what looks to be consumer-grade 4K cameras, which still looks very good, in my opinion, and are skillfully used for the most part here. Some editing that I think is less than successful, and there's a few choices of scenes that run long and a couple other scenes that are cut too short. But I would say that these films are incredibly watchable, incredibly enjoyable, and have a weird innocence to them, even though they have some pretty rough subject matter. It feels to me more like something like Miss 45 or Last House on the Left in a way, which, although those films don't have an innocence to them, they feel like they come from a more innocent time, when you could make a film that was frank and explicit without worrying about being accused of that being your motivation by itself. Or if it was your motivation, no one was viewing that as anything wrong. Again, you weren't going to degrade the society because you made a film that was frank and explicit. We're just so far away from where we were even in the late 70s. We've gotten so safe with our entertainment in America. And I think that is holding, in particular, the horror genre back, but probably all genres to a different degree. Violence, that is morality and mortality, right, are so crucial to the horror genre that the moment you start watching your P's and Q's, the moment you start sandpapering down those rough edges, it gets harder for this genre to be really successful at invoking those dark emotions that are really what defines the genre. Do I suggest you go watch these films? Well, to be honest with you, I think a lot of you are just not going to like them and not see what I see in them. There's always going to be those titles, right, that you love and the majority dislike. If you go online right now and look for reviews, you're not going to find many very, very, very good reviews for Corpse Prison at all. But I'll tell you what, if you get the opportunity, I'd like you to take a chance. And while you're watching them, think, would this ever be made in America? Could this be made in America? We once were a society that claimed that you could show a person getting hacked to pieces or shot in the head every 5 minutes, but you couldn't show the precious act of making love. And I feel like we're exactly the opposite now. I feel like sex is much more accessible, but violence has to be codified in a very specific way to be acceptable. And if you go outside those lines of what is acceptable, what is okay inside a society that is fixated on playing moral avengers, you get vilified, and your film gets called all kinds of names, and the directors and writers have to fear for their lives, and they have to remove any Twitter accounts they have. Corpse Prison is exactly the film that does not care. One word of warning, if you do watch the first film, it ends with a big-ass cliffhanger because it wants you to go directly to the second film. They came out simultaneously, is my understanding, so they were always meant to watch as a pair. So if you're looking to watch just the first film, you're probably going to have a less than satisfactory experience. And if you just pick up the second film without watching the first film, I guess you'll pick up the pieces, but you'll be missing out on so much of the foundation. Anyway, I just wanted to step in and give a good word to a couple films, or one film, depending how you look at it, that deserves a lot more exposure, in my opinion, and also a mindset that we must find a way back to, which is that it is okay to explore the darkest realms of our world inside of our entertainment. We do not have to shrink back from all the criticism that comes because we made someone who's probably not even a part of the horror community uncomfortable.